The Imagining the Digital Future Center is a 2-year-old creation at Elon University that came out of a 23-year-old initiative at Elon where Professor Jana Anderson, particularly, but Assistant Professor Connie Book was one of the mainstays of our early work, where we collaborated on surveys and qualitative questions really of experts about the future of the internet. So we marched through 4 revolutions in the course of our work over 23 years: the broadband revolution, the mobile connectivity revolution, the social media revolution, and then now the AI revolution. And we've archived a lot of reports and consulted tens of thousands of experts to compile their answers for us. And again, I was a parasite. I just asked questions and reprinted the answers. I was ChatGPT before it was formalized. The other thing that my center is doing was slightly referred to by President Book in her remarks here, but just to note after the wonderful panel that we heard at Elon, some of the anchoring things that we're doing as part of AI initiatives is to work with AAC&U, American Association of Colleges and Universities, to create these student guides, how students can think about AI as they march through their college careers and then think about their futures. And we also did some that work in the United Nations meeting about articulating principles that have now been embraced by hundreds of universities around the world and by students. And it's really become a coalition that's grown by the virtue of its own ideas. And we've done other work with AAC&U to try to figure out what's going on in college campuses. So we did a report last year where we did a survey of college presidents, provosts, and chancellors, issued findings about how confused and disrupted online campus was from their perspective. We're about to field an equivalent survey of faculty using the AAC&U database of about 80,000 faculty members. So we hope to have something in the coming months about how faculty members themselves are experiencing this crazy thing that we're involved with. So the backstory of this particular work I'm going to share today begins in 2013 when we fielded a survey and reported the findings in 2014 we asked experts, there's lots of concern now about the impact of AI on jobs. The infamous Oxford report had just come out about, some high level, 96% of jobs are going to be shafted. And it was in the cultural public sphere. So we asked the question that couldn't be any more simple. In the future, is AI and automation going to create more jobs than it destroys, or destroy more jobs than it creates? And we got an absolutely split down the middle verdict. And half the experts said history is a good teacher here, and we're going to end up fine. It's going to be a big disruption. It's not going to be fun to go through it, but eventually we'll get what we got in the Industrial Revolution. We're going to have richer societies, greater human longevity. All the metrics of sort of human flourishing are going to improve. The other half said, the Industrial Revolution is not the thing to be looking at here, because we're seeing levels of disruption across so many domains of life: informatics, genomics, cognitive science, nanotechnology and stuff. We're not ready for this. The level of care that's going to have to be put in each of these domains, it requires, societal level engagement for a long time, and we've got multiples of that going on. But the one answer that we got from those experts that was consistent, whether they thought things were going to turn out well or ill, was that as jobs get replaced or jobs get challenged in this, the saving grace for humanity will be what is called soft skills. And one of these experts in this survey basically articulated the question that we're studying today. So we tried to be a little bit prescient on this, but the universal answer that we got, no matter what people were saying about the exact outcomes in the future, was that the saving grace of humans would be what were called at the time soft skills. The Nobel economist James Heckman was the one who sort of brought the term to the culture and propagated it in the field of economics. And he was actually picking up nomenclature from the Army, which began separating soft skills and hard skills as they were assessing recruits to the Army in the 1950s. So it was basically picking up that language. The Soft Skills Institute came into being then. The story that they were hoping to tell was that there are certain things computers can't do and humans do. And they represent deep forms of intelligence and moral thinking and things like that. So the saving grace of us all will be our critical thinking skills, our empathy, our sympathy, our social and emotional intelligence, and things like that. So for a while, that argument rested, and you probably heard it if you were following these debates. And AI was beginning to roll more deeply through the culture. So the center itself reported on the future of jobs training. I mean, with the invitation from the survey that we've done is, well, if we're all going to have to change our jobs, what's going to happen to jobs training? We did reports on that. We did it in reports about the future of truth and the future of trust and the future of humans. We set up this conference by doing work about 8 years ago related to that. Then we talked about ethical design in AI, and then we talked about the future of human agency, which is one of the reasons that that's on the agenda for breakout groups today, is because we were thinking about that long time ago. And then we did a survey once my center came fully housed in Elon of these experts and talking about how AI would affect both individuals and institutions. And we reported that a year ago in February as the center sort of launched itself on campus. And as we went through the answers that the experts gave us then, so it's a year ago, the first thing that was a recurrent theme and a dominant theme of the answers they were giving us is that as AI rolls through the culture, we're going to have to reimagine what it means to be human. Then we're also going to have to rethink about what the role of institutions is and how to constitute institutions. They worried about the enfeeblement of humanity, and that came up in a lot of their answers. Some people basically said, don't fear the tech. I mean, it's the tech is AI is normal argument. People are the problem and the solution. And then there were lots of people who could articulate what they thought some of the AI benefits would be, and that we wanted to signal that in citing the themes. So we took that first theme answer and we built it into the research that we did this year. First by doing one of these expert surveys and canvassings. We released that in April, and it was, the organizing principle was, okay, now this soft skills stuff, this human essence stuff is on the table. Because AI systems, language models in particular, were doing a lot of the things that Jamie Boyle was talking about. They were looking like humans, acting like humans, sounding like humans, giving the full impression that they might be humans. And so we thought, rather than just deferring to the fact that these human special traits might survive the AI onslaught, we decided to ask about them and what AI might do to them. So we did a literature review and we left a bunch of stuff on the cutting room floor, but we settled on 12 human traits that we thought were important to measure and asked about how AI might affect them. Would the effect be more negative than positive, more positive than negative? And the 12 traits that we asked about, I'm just going to read this list because it's the anchor of the work that we're doing now. Curiosity and capacity to learn, creativity, decision-making and problem-solving. That was our phrasing for essentially for critical thinking. A capacity to think deeply. Metacognition, yes, we actually used the word metacognition on a survey and people didn't rebel on it. Social and emotional intelligence, empathy and the application of moral judgment, self-identity, meaning and purpose in life, trust in shared values and cultural norms, individual agency, which was, hearkening back to the thing we had done several years before, mental well-being, and confidence in their own abilities. Would AI be demoralizing for, grit or the human trait that is so essential to us making progress forward? And so we got the expert answers on that, and the experts of those 12 traits, 9 of them, the experts thought things would come out more negatively than positively. And 3 of them, they said things would come out more positively than negatively. The things they picked were positive were the impact, AI's impact on creativity, AI's impact on curiosity, and AI's impact on decision making. And just to back up half a minute here, the experts that we're talking to are diverse, interesting, multiple disciplines, multiple points on the compass on their relationship to technology. Lots of scholars in the group, but we also have tech pioneers like Vint Cerf and Leonard Kleinrock in our surveys, and they respond to them. We also talk to people who are in the trenches building this stuff. So it's not remotely close to being a representative sample of all expertise on these areas, but we feel we're getting lots of perspectives from different points on the compass. And so it was interesting that experts thought 9 would turn out badly. Those 3 things would turn out well. Today, we're releasing this report, and there are copies of the essence of it on the handout tables here. But the public story is somewhat close to the expert story when it comes to their assessments about what's going to happen, with a couple of exceptions. The survey itself is done by a big, reputable representative sample firm. Nobody does phone polls anymore because they're not representative. People don't answer their phones anymore. But they're really robust, well-recruited, well-identified panels, and we used one of them. It was conducted in mid-July, and the margin of error is, as you see, 3.5%. So we asked, as we did with the experts, we asked a sort of big foundational question before we through those 12 traits. And we asked, what would the overall level of impact be of the rollout of AI? And half these respondents said it would either be dramatic, and we defined these terms in the survey, so they had a clear sense of what we were asking about. It would be dramatic, there would be fundamental revolutionary change, about a fifth said that, and about a third said considerable, there will be deep and meaningful change. And then there were sort of other ways that the other half of the folks responded. They were not necessarily as intense and as dramatic as those kinds of answers. We also asked about the direction of the change that people thought. And again, we asked experts about that, and their answers were relatively similar to these. The strong plurality answered that the changes would go in both directions, which is kind of mapping with, I think, the cultural narrative about the rollout of AI. There are things that people understand might go really well for us. Eric was referring to a whole bunch of that. And there are things that might break bad for us, and I think that's why we got the answers that they did. And some divided between, it was going to be more negative, mostly for the better or mostly for the worse. But there's an interesting sort of split verdict on that kind of question. And what we got is on all 12 of these dimensions, the one that I ran through before and the ones I'll just share with you now, the public thinks that things will turn out more negative than positive. And I'm just running, I've put them in blocks here so you can see the slides and run through them, but they're negative about the impact on social and emotional intelligence. They're negative on the impact of thinking deeply about complex subjects, on metacognition, on empathy and moral judgment. Same thing on human agency, decision-making and problem-solving, self-identity, meaning and purpose, trust in shared norms, innovative thinking, confidence in their own abilities, mental well-being, and curiosity. With curiosity was the more interesting one because there's a little bit tighter delta between the negatives and the positives. Again, and the expert survey is not a scientific survey, but we have a big enough sample there, and we certainly had a scientific sample from the general public that we thought it was okay to do a comparison between expert and general population opinion on these things. And there were 4 areas where the public is more pessimistic about the future than the experts are. Those are metacognition. Maybe that was a definitional problem. The experts probably had a better idea of what we were asking them in that question. But what the heck? Decision-making, problem-solving, innovative thinking, creativity, and curiosity, and capacity to learn. So in a way that kind of makes sense. These are big abstract ideas. Asking about them in a survey is kind of a challenge to begin with. I feel like the data have face validity. People weren't giving crazy answers, and people weren't sort of one-lining down the answers, always giving the same answer for everything. People were really sort of thinking discriminatingly about these things. But then there were, 7 subjects where the delta isn't very great between the public and the expert community, and you can see those there. And the one where experts are more pessimistic than the general population relates to trust. And I think that's partly a story about experts of all kinds. There are a bunch of social scientists in our survey. They understand, or they've been thinking a lot more about the decline of both social and institutional trust in the country for a long time. Actually, it's a global phenomenon. So they've been thinking about that, and they've been thinking about the consequences of that more than the average citizen might have. So that answer is sort of understandable there. We also did, here's the shocker of the data as far as I'm concerned, and I will hope people will grab me by the lapels before I leave here today and give me their theories about why this is true. I've got some ersatz theories on it, but I'm sure somebody will be smarter than I on this. Those with higher levels of education are more pessimistic than those with lower levels of education. As a technology researcher, that absolutely reverses the valence of surveys forever on digital technologies, but also all kinds of technologies. If you look at the adoption of innovation literature, it's always people with higher levels of education, early adopters, early enthusiasts, thinking that the long-term consequences are going to break good, and those with lesser levels of education are the ones who are more pessimistic or nervous or not necessarily deeply into those kinds of spaces. This is the reverse here. Even though it's the case that higher educated folks are much more likely than less well-educated folks to be adopters of AI systems, of language models in particular. So they're using it, but they're freaking out about it in the long term. And so I'm open to theories about this. There are a couple that I've been playing with, and it's it invites further research. So it's an easy way to get an answer here. But when we ask them about their usage cases, and with language model users in particular, they know the technology, and it's not that daunting. It's an interface with language models. It's easy to use. They don't feel menaced when they put in their queries and get back their answers and have a conversation or things like that. I mean, it's amazing to some people that this occurs, but it's not menacing that it's happening on a device that they know, happening in an interface that's pretty intuitive, and it just, the menace just doesn't feel there. When you're asking them about metacognition and social and emotional intelligence and empathy and curiosity, I think people with higher levels of education might sort of elevate to their worries about this stuff, that they can see the consequences now. They're probably more familiar a bit with some of the narratives about how this can break bad and things. And those who have lesser levels of education were also more likely than those with higher to just say, I don't know the answer to this. We gave them the option on it. And you saw in the queries, there was a significant number of people ranging from about 10 to 20% who didn't feel like they wanted to answer our question. And I'm assuming a lot of that is just, I don't know enough to feel like I can judge. But the other theory I have on this is the classic social science finding of I'm okay, they're not. And if long-standing findings that people love their school, their local neighborhood school, but think the education system is a disaster. They love their local physician, but they think the healthcare system is a disaster. They like their member of Congress, but Congress is just foregone awful. And so there's this. I think there's a sort of personal efficacy bias that's built into this. Is I know how to use this stuff, or I know I can deal with it. And so I'm not worried about me when I'm giving this answer, but I'm worried about all the other knuckleheads I know exist in this society, right? And then we've seen in lots of polling about people whose views differ and things like that. And I think they're voting against their culture rather than talking about their own likely experiences there. But I would love to hear alternatives on that. There are lots of themes that come out of this work. I'm just highlighting a couple here, and I'd love to ponder more if you have questions about them and things like that. But there's this just palpable universal sense that the moment that we are in is a pivotal moment. That we've still, this panel and many of the comments this morning were, we can still shape the way these things go. And we can be smart about that, especially if we're aware and we're discerning and we're invited into these conversations, and particularly if our institutions respond with sort of smart, discerning, deliberative processes to figure that out. But there's definitely a sense that this is a hinge point, and it feels fraught to people, and they would like to calm down about it if they possibly could. There's a sense that, if not now, soon enough, there's going to be new silicon-based intelligences that permeate our lives as agents, as helpers, embedded into the systems that we already know, like email and social media, PowerPoints and things like that. There's just a sense that we're sharing the space now, in some respects, particularly the intellectual and cognitive space, with other intelligences that are going to be interesting to engage with. And that means that the nature of human experience will be transformed when we act with these synthetic systems. One of the wonderful answers we got in the expert survey this year, we talked about the boundaries that are now that used to be pretty concrete and used to be pretty discrete, are now being broken down by the ubiquity of AI intelligences, among other things. Intelligence itself, what's mine and what's the machine's. Reality and fiction, we're all entering, God knows, and after the week we've had, we've just seen evidence aplenty about how everybody's competing to shape the narrative, and it's hard to tell in many cases whether it's coming from humans, whether it's coming from artificial intelligences, whether it's coming from reputable and discerning media systems, or whether it's coming from the slot merchants and stuff like that. So reality and fiction are now blended together in challenging ways. Human and synthetic creations that's the same dang thing, really. And there are, skilled practitioners, and their distinction with augmented humans is going to be hard to discern. And I think in some cases, starting maybe with medicine, we want to know where the human is in that exchange, and in that decision-making process, in that relational capacity with us as patients. And even the basic question of what we think we know and what everybody else knows. So one of the secret sauces of human beings is always we have a theory of mind of other people, how they're reacting, why they're reacting the way they are. They got brains like ours, right? And now that's sort of up for grabs in a set of spaces where we're not sure what everybody else knows, in part because we're getting so much feedback and information from systems that are not human and things like that. And everybody is convinced that new social economic disparities are going to emerge from this. There's a very strong feeling across the board. The general population answers we get on this, as well as the experts' answers we get on this, is part of the reason this is a pivot point and so fraught is because as these things propagate through the culture, there are new ways that we're going to divide ourselves. There are new ways that they are going to advantage people who can take advantage of them, and disadvantage folks who get hammered by them or don't really know them well, don't have the fluency that we were talking about before, and things like that. So that's the headline data. I hope it gets covered by the media. And I think do we have a little time for any questions?
See a couple of questions that popped up right away, so I will make sure Mike gets them.
Thanks so much. That was fascinating. This actually should be a really quick question. Going back to the educational disparity in public perception, did you look at partisanship?
It's multi-partisan, or it's non-partisan. It's across the board. We've actually tested some of the other sort of ideological valences of the data, and people don't yet think that the models are spitting out answers in one direction or another as a general rule in their experience. And there was not partisan sort of distress in one direction or another.
Great. We've got a question back here.
Hi, thanks, Lee. This is tremendously exciting. When the folks that I speak with thinking through the civilization level impacts of what's going on in machine intelligence right now, talk about it and try to make historical analogs, they almost always like to come back to, oh, this is electricity 2.0, or this is industrial revolution 4.0. And they pick these major changes. It's the Haber-Bosch process, but for cognition, which is kind of my favorite, admittedly. And I think these metaphors are helpful thinking tools, but what they also point to is points in the timeline where we could have historical precedents of what did people think back then. So is there been any work done to compare this to, and everything you just described, to how did people receive things like the British Industrial Revolution or American Industrial Revolution, as opposed to how did they receive social media or the internet?
Yes. One of the chronic frustrations about being a digital technology researcher is there are no pre-internet data on people's feeling about whether this is fire or electricity or the internal combustion engine or something like that. The answer that you've heard, I'm sure, and that commonly occurs in the in among a bunch of analysts, is the difference between the language models, the generative AI tools, and things that came before them is your use of the word cognitive. They're cognitive tools. Tools heretofore have extended human physical capacities. This is the first time we've faced a tool that looks like it has cognitive capacities. And in the information age, which succeeded the industrial age, where so many livelihoods depend on processing symbols and things like that, there's a sense that this is one of the unique parts of this. And, it's a great parlor game to play about what it means. And I recently read a wonderful book about, fire being the thing, because fire taught our ancestors that cooked food was good to have, and that gave us more protein, and that gave us bigger brains, and on and on and on and on. So I don't know the answer to that. And I wish I could get in a time machine and do scientific surveys of, Homo sapiens.
Great. We want to go to a question.
One more question, maybe, or
Yeah, well, we can do a couple actually.
Okay.
One online, but I just want to offer an additional comment. And I'll come here. Just to your note, we can't rely on old survey data, but there's a lovely book. We'll probably have to turn to historians here, called "When Old Technologies Were New" by Carolyn Marvin. That might be worth looking at, because it's a really wonderful exploration of exactly the point that you're raising, that we've been here at different points. I want to move to a question online, and then I know there's a couple of hands in the room, and then I know we'll move ahead on time. But go ahead, Shane.
Thank you, Brian. Question online is, on the generally higher pessimism among more educated U.S. adults, possible that college plus U.S. adults generally rate/perceive themselves high in these cognitive skills and traits, so a technology that might usurp ownership of these skills is more threatening to that demographic. Perhaps AI is perceived to threaten any value/advantage gained through formal education.
Yeah. It's been so interesting to watch the evolution of the impact on jobs debate, because when we first asked it in 2013, it was about assembly line jobs and working class jobs and manual jobs and things like that. And I don't actually know when the focus tipped to the knowledge work and things like that, but it clearly tipped. And one of the exercises that a number of maybe economists in the room and others have done has been fabulous and challenging to do, because one great set of data that is collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics is called ONET data, and they look at jobs and the skills that comprise those jobs. And one of the exercises that we who study technology has gone through is looked at those listings, which is great baseline data, but to watch how skills have changed over time as manual labor became less a bigger part of the population, and knowledge labor became a larger part, was that there's a skills shift. So the job of nurse is way different now from what it was 20 years ago. And so one of the exercises that you go through when you're analyzing this data, in the way to understand the AI impact, is you look at exposure to AI. You can't sort of say this job's going to get hammered by it, but you can at least go through the skills matrix that those jobs are composed of and sort of say, yeah, this is going to get really overtaken by AI sooner rather than later. But it's still a little bit of dart throwing. There isn't consensus on exactly where AI will go, and exactly what exposure people have now, and exactly what composition of an individual job an AI replicant might be going after. So I like that answer a lot, and the most freaked out are grad students or people with higher degrees, more so than just college degrees. And I think that's part of the likely answer there. Nice, I like
Great.
that.
I think we've got two questions at this table. Is that right? So I'll give you here and then back there.
Thank you. I'm curious for the 12 qualities that you were assessing across, were you able to get a benchmark of how important or how valuable the individuals thought those to be in the first place? And the reason I ask, if you have somebody who thinks mental health doesn't really matter in general or creativity is not super important, well, they're not going to be as worried about the impact of AI on them. So is there any sort of foundational understanding where folks starting from in addition to their
There
educational
wasn't.
background?
We have debated about doing that, and frankly, it's hard to get survey respondents to sort of march through a grid that asks about the same things multiple times, and so that we were trying to be sensitive to respondent needs, and but it's a great idea, and that ought to be the next line of research, and go for it.
So my question was similar to the one that was online, in that I think higher levels of education are threatened because education has essentially sometimes been the gatekeeper of knowledge. And so then the internet released a little bit of that to the public, and now this is changing. And I think on the other side, it's probably been the elevator to where high school based educations see it as, I now can have the knowledge, I now have the tool. And so that digital divide, although we sometimes say it can widen with the right tools, that it starts to level set. And so could it also be that there's that level set of, I now have access to that knowledge that you had worked 4 years plus for, and I'm getting it in seconds.
Yeah. Yes. That makes a ton of sense. It fits into a larger cultural narrative about the wonders and dangers of the meritocracy. And a universal college for everyone was thought to be the antidote to some of the disparities in the culture and things like that. There's education now is a fraught space in many respects. So that's going on. I think the other thing I can think of related to your answer is that people are, there's a status component that's related to this, and you can't tell the way we ask the questions whether people are freaked out about their status or not. But relative status is an incredibly powerful hallmark. People's perceptions about where they fit on the ladder is an incredibly powerful predictor about how they live their lives, think about things, act in the world, and things like that. So I think to the degree that we're surfacing, oh my God, it's coming for me, particularly among higher educated, I think that's a really possible thing that's going on here.
Yeah. Okay. One more question.
Okay, so you talked about the boundaries between fiction and nonfiction. So as a humanist, I'd like to go back to the Industrial Revolution and talk about a work of science fiction that grew out of that, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
That's one example. So if you look at that, what was science fiction then is a reality today, right? We can actually create a monster or an angel or whatever we wish to. Now, I'm also looking at another work, that was Mary Shelley's, and now there's Kazuo Ishiguro's new work, Clara and the Sun. And Clara is a robot in a toy store, and she gets all her energy, solar energy is what gives her life. And she has been created to make a little girl less lonely. So, I'm just responding to your boundaries between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
And as a humanities scholar, I'm looking at the role of art, the artist, that art follows life, Frankenstein, whatever. But life also follows art, in the sense that if the writer was a visionary in the 19th century England and created a Frankenstein, that vision has become reality today, right? So I'm talking about the writer's prophet and also writers. And I'm kind of blurring your distinctions between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah. Beautiful. One of the hopes that I try to articulate and mostly get groans when I'm in rooms with humanists in them is that in a way, and what we're here today is discuss the forcing function of these technologies on imagining who we are. And, who humans are, what they do, what they can possibly achieve, what their fantasies might look like, is the job and domain of humanists. And so in a way, you could see a scenario where humanists make a stirring comeback from the way that they have been struggling in recent times. I'm just remembering, some people in the room might know this story a little bit better, but there was a period in which there was a content analysis done of science fiction. And the vast majority of science fiction produced was dystopian. And the worry was that in part because the writers were leading the way to the future and imagining the future, that they were basically sketching out too gloomy a future. And if people really did follow their imaginations, that wouldn't end particularly well. So I think there was a contest, or at least there was a call for some sort of response from utopians. It's like, do a better job of figuring out how this stuff works out for us. And the new book that I struggled with thinking through on this, but I just commend it to you. Nick Bostrom, one of the early P-doomers on superintelligence, wrote a recent book called Utopia: How Humans Will React, Behave, and Respond in a Totally Solved World. His imagination was that AI is going to solve all of our problems, and we were going to live as long as we wanted to. We would have as many resources as we wanted to. We would have the leisure experiences that were glorious and stuff like that. So the baseline question was, how are we going to make meaning in that world when a lot of stuff that has given us meaning is off the table? And it's a really great thought exercise where he doesn't he says humans are resilient and humans are resourceful and we'll figure stuff out, but it's hard to think through what that will look like now.